Welcome back to Turning Hard Times into Good Times. I am your host, Jay Taylor, and I'm really pleased to have with me once again Chris Powell. Chris has been a career journalist since graduating from high school a number of years ago, something like the number of years ago that I graduated from high school. We won't mention the number, but it's been back there a little while. A lot of experience both Chris and I have had. He is has been the managing editor of a major newspaper there in Connecticut. I think the name of the paper escapes my memory, but we'll ask him in just a second. The Journal Inquirer in Connecticut there, and but he's also, I've known Chris not as a newspaper editor, although he's put those skills to work, working for the Gold Antitrust Action Committee, and Chris, along with my good friend Bill Murphy, started the Gold Antitrust Action Committee in the late 1980s. I remember
1999 is when we incorporated. It was 98 when we started.
1998. Well, I'm losing track of time. There have been so many decades have passed me by that I can't remember. It seems like 88, but 88 is the same as 98 to me.
It was a long time ago.
Yeah, it was a long time ago, but I remember very clearly, and it was 1998, sitting on a platform with Frank Veneroso and Bill Murphy and up in Montreal. And we were talking, and Bill was telling me about how you guys were getting this thing started, the Gold Antitrust Action Committee. So I'm really glad to have you with me again, Chris. Thanks for joining me.
Oh, I'm delighted to be here, Jay.
And thanks for helping me out with the name of your newspaper. And anyway, you and I know, we think we know, we've seen a huge amount of evidence that the gold markets are manipulated, and my thought is, well, why wouldn't they be? I mean, from one point of view, every market in the world is manipulated because we have fiat money. Since every one half of every transaction involves money that is corrupt and created out of nothing, then by virtue of the fact that the Fed can increase and decrease the money supply at will, it is manipulating the markets. It manipulates interest rates, and so why wouldn't it manipulate the gold price? So, but, this is still something that isn't the focus of most people in America. Most people believe what they're told. They still have, as James Grant says, faith in the PhD standard as opposed to the gold standard. People still believe in that these wise men in Washington, wise women, know how to handle things. So if the gold markets are rigged, if there's manipulation at least, if that's maybe a better word, who are the players, Chris? Who's big enough to do this?
Well, the central banks are big enough to do it, Jay. They used to do it in the open. That's what the gold standard was about. That's what the London gold pool of the 1960s was about. It was about fixing the value of currencies in gold terms. Now they do it largely surreptitiously, but if you research as we have done and examine the documentation that is in the public sector, and sometimes it is leaked out without authorization, you find that they are operating directly in the gold market, often through intermediaries, but nevertheless they are very heavily involved in the gold market. We have documents from the International Monetary Fund, the Bank for International Settlements, statements by central bankers that really have been made in public or put in their memoirs, some of them very contemporaneous, establishing that central banks are in the gold market every day. In fact, there was a statement by an official of the French central bank just about a year ago saying that the Bank of France trades gold for its own account and for other central banks virtually every day of the year. Now, either they're doing this for fun or they're doing this for policy purposes. And if they're doing it for policy purposes, they're doing it for price control. I think this is pretty obvious. All you have to do to, I think, convince yourself is to put the right specific questions to central banks and the IMF and the BIS and watch them turn tail and run.
Yeah, they don't respond, huh? They just run like hell.
No, they'll say, "Oh, the information we want is confidential." Well, basically, you're asking for is, can we see the documentation of your trading in the gold market? Do you have gold swaps with other central banks? What's the purpose of these swaps? You can establish this, very easily from the documentation that's available. But I simply urge anybody who's skeptical of these assertions to review the documentation himself. It's all posted in the documentation file on our internet site, gata.org, to put very specific questions about gold operations to central banks, and anybody can do what we have done.
GATA.org is where people should go. I guess, Chris, how can people get your daily misses? Because you send them, I get 2, 3, 4 of these a day. A lot of great information and people in the gold markets of authority who are talking about what's going on. It's very, very valuable if you want to keep up with this, with what's going on in the gold markets. Chris, there's nobody doing a better job than you guys are doing. How can people get on your mailing list?
Oh, well, yeah, we do have a dispatch list. We will send out sometimes 2 or 3 things, sometimes only 7 or 8 or 9 things per day. You can subscribe to our email list. It's free, just going to gata.org, and in the right column there's a mechanism for signing up for our dispatches, and you can choose either individual dispatches, or if you don't want to be bothered by multiple dispatches during the day, you can just elect to receive our daily summary dispatch, which will list all the dispatches that have gone out in the previous 24 hours.
Chris, if you were to tell our listeners, if you were to give them just a few examples, 2 or 3 at least, of some of the most compelling evidence that the central banks are playing or manipulating the gold markets, what would they be?
Well, there's a few that I'm particularly fond of. There's the 1999 secret staff report of the International Monetary Fund to the board of the International Monetary Fund. It was the document is marked secret, but GATA obtained a copy of it, and it's posted in the documentation of our internet site. The staff report of the IMF in 1999 was part of an attempt by the IMF staff to bring more transparency to the accounts of banks, central banks that were members of the IMF. The IMF heard complaints that central bank gold records were very misleading because central banks are reporting on the same line in their books gold that was in the vault and gold that was leased out. Central banks are not distinguishing their gold in the vault from gold that had been leased and impaired in some way. So the IMF staff proposed to the IMF board and to the member central banks of the IMF that central banks be required to distinguish leased gold from gold in the vault. In pursuit of this proposal, the IMF staff surveyed member central banks about disclosing their gold leases, and the IMF staff report from March 1999 recounts how this suggestion of disclosing gold leases was received with horror by the member central banks because the staff report explains if the central banks disclosed their gold leases, it would reveal their surreptitious intervention in the gold market and the currency markets. So that is pretty much a smoking gun, but there are other smoking guns. The annual report of the Bank for International Settlements in Basel, Switzerland, the central bank of the central bank, candidly admits that the BIS is the gold bank and gold broker for dozens of central banks that it trades in the gold market. For those central bank members, that it trades not only in gold itself, but in gold options and futures and derivatives. In fact, one of the documents that we posted on our internet site is a PowerPoint presentation that the BIS made to prospective central bank members a few years ago. Among the services the BIS was advertising to prospective central bank members was secret intervention in the gold market. So the BIS in its annual report acknowledges that it is the gold broker, trader, futures and options broker for central banks, and the BIS even advertises that it conducts secret gold market interventions for central banks. So those are a couple of pretty good smoking guns there. But we also have memoirs by various central bankers over the years, minutes of meetings at the State Department about rigging the gold price, intelligence agency memoranda that have been declassified. There's very much of this stuff, Jay, and it's all documented, and it's posted in the documentation file on our internet site, which is accessible to anybody. And I just urge people who are skeptical not to take my word about any of this stuff, but please examine the documentation, examine document by document, and see if you think the documents are forgeries or if you think they're being misconstrued. I'm confident that an open-minded person will not think that they're forgeries, especially since many of them still reside on central bank internet sites, and I don't think people will conclude that we've misconstrued them.
No, in fact, you guys have done an awful lot of work and documented an awful lot of evidence, some more circumstantial, I suppose. I mean, I think back to the time when Alan Greenspan made a famous quote in a House Banking Committee in which he said something about central banks stand ready to lease gold in increasing quantities should the price begin to rise, or something to that effect, if I have that right.
That's it. No, you got it exactly right. But Greenspan was in that testimony to the House and Senate banking committees in the summer of 1998, he was trying to persuade Congress not to enact legislation regulating derivatives. And his reference to gold was to explain to the congressman that they did not have to worry about anybody cornering the gold market, because central banks already had the gold market cornered through gold leasing. And in fact, he didn't exactly put it this way, but I think Greenspan, one of the reasons Greenspan was against regulation of derivatives is because central banks themselves were using derivatives as a primary mechanism for controlling the gold market.
Chris, people that invest in the gold markets, people like me who buy gold mining shares, care an awful lot about the gold price. But to most people, it's irrelevant. Most people think it's irrelevant, at least. Even some of my colleagues that I won't name, but guys that I'm Canadian analysts who sometimes I sit on stages with and talk to about the mining companies and so forth, are not of the same persuasion that I am, that gold is very, very important as a monetary asset. And so they say, what's all the fuss about? The gold markets are so small compared to the treasury markets, compared to the stock markets, especially the bond markets. What do you tell people in terms of why is this so important? I mean, after all, we have a government that seems to not pay much attention to a lot of the laws and the intentions of our founding fathers. So why not? What's the big deal?
Well, actually, Jay, the gold market is not really small, and if you consider what it functions as, it's actually the most decisive market of all, because gold is the determinant of the value not only of all other currencies, but it's a determinant of interest rates and the value of government bonds. There's much academic literature on this point. There's a big academic paper written, I think, in the 1980s by Lawrence Summers, who was then economics professor at Harvard, who went on to be assistant Treasury Secretary and then Treasury Secretary. His co-author with the paper was Robert Barsky, who's still a professor of economics at the University of Michigan. They wrote a paper called Gibson's Paradox and the Gold Standard, I guess. It was a long study about the relationship between the gold price and interest rates, and Summers and Barsky confirmed what others had found, that ordinarily in a free market, the price of gold is inversely related to real interest rates. If real interest rates are high, the gold price is low, and if real interest rates are low, the gold price is high. The implication of the Summers and Barsky paper was that governments could achieve their nirvana of low interest rates and high government borrowings and high government bond prices if the governments could get control of the gold price. Well, governments have been trying to get control of the gold price for years. As I said, that's what the gold standard was about. But there is this very close relationship between the gold price and the value of currencies and interest rates and the value of government bonds. That's why gold is really the biggest market of all, because if you are controlling the gold price, you can control interest rates, you can control government bond prices, you can control equity prices, you can control currency values. Basically, control of the gold price is control of the value of all capital, labor, goods, and services in the world. And if you think for a minute, you realize that economically there is nothing else.
Yeah, well, it certainly is crucial. I believe that's true, but I would just ask the question because it seems like an awful lot of people don't seem to think that gold matters much. I think that's probably part of the propaganda.
Central banks themselves do think it matters that much, and that's really what our documentation establishes. We have on our internet site, among other things, the transcript of a meeting between Secretary of State Henry Kissinger and one of his deputies in the State Department in 1974, in which his deputy explains to him that possession of gold, control of gold, is actually the most important economic variable in the world because it allows the possessor of gold to really increase and control the money supply in the world. And Kissinger was discussing with his deputy how this control of official gold reserves is really an important objective of United States policy because it's the mechanism of by which the United States can control the world. Now, your friends and my friends don't have to think that this is very important, but I think I can show them documentation establishing that governments and central banks understand the golden rule to be that whoever controls the gold makes the rules.
Yeah, well, indeed, that seems to be the case, and for sure has been through history, Chris. But can this go on infinitely with about 30 seconds or so? Do you think this is going to go on much further, much longer?
Boy, Jay, I don't know. I think it is largely a question of public awareness. If people become aware of what's going on and act accordingly, I think it will end. If people remain ignorant and accept paper gold in place of real metal, then I think it can go on forever.
Yeah, well, let's hope that people wise up. It's certainly at GATA, you've done your part, you and Bill Murphy and the many people that work with you to help shine some light on the darkness of central bankers, these guys that are really robbing the public in many ways. I think, and gold, I think you've really pointed it out well, Chris, that it is actually the foundation for which the capital markets are legitimized. And if you take that away, we've seen all manner of bastardization of the capital markets. David Stockman talks about the complete the destruction of the capital markets, certainly through zero interest rate policy, and that, as you point out, can only be maintained, as Summers pointed out, if the gold price is suppressed. So I want to thank you very much, Chris, for helping us out here, understanding the connections here between the importance of the gold price manipulation and policies. It's not just about some of us who are invested in the gold markets who would like to make some money in it. I'm actually invested in the gold markets because I've seen this problem coming. It wasn't because I wanted to get rich that way. It was just because I could see that the gold was going to go much, much higher. But GATA, you and the folks at GATA, Chris, have done a remarkable job. I want to thank you very much for sharing some of that information. Again, folks, go to GATA, GATA.org, to sign up for the daily missives that Chris Powell and his crew send out. Thank you very much, Chris, for being with me once again.
Thanks for your interest, Jay.